The Trojan Horse, the greatest deception in ancient history. There are stories that have survived thousands of years, tales so powerful they've been retold in every generation, in every language, across every culture. Stories that capture something fundamental about human nature, our cleverness, our pride, our capacity for both wisdom and folly. This is one of those stories. It's about a war that lasted 10 years. About warriors who became legends. About a city that seemed invincible. And about a gift that was really a curse, a moment of triumph that became a doorway to destruction. This is the story of the Trojan Horse, the greatest deception in ancient history, and the fall of one of the mightiest cities of the ancient world. To understand how the war ended, you must first understand how it began. And like so many wars, it started with an insult, a theft, and wounded pride. The trouble began at a wedding, not just any wedding, but the marriage of Peleus and Thetis, a mortal king and a sea goddess. All the gods were invited, save one, Eris, the goddess of discord. Furious at the slight, Eris appeared anyway, rolling a golden apple into the festivities inscribed with the words "to the fairest." 3 goddesses immediately claimed it: Hera, queen of the gods; Athena, goddess of wisdom and war; and Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty. They demanded that someone judge between them, and the unfortunate task fell to Paris, a prince of Troy. Each goddess offered him a bribe. Hera promised power and kingdoms. Athena offered wisdom and victory in battle. But Aphrodite made the offer Paris couldn't refuse: the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. That woman was Helen, wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta. Paris chose Aphrodite. And when he traveled to Sparta and saw Helen, the goddess made good on her promise. Whether through enchantment or genuine passion, the stories differ. Helen left with Paris, abandoning her husband and daughter, sailing across the Aegean Sea to Troy. Menelaus was enraged. His brother Agamemnon, the most powerful king in Greece, rallied the Greek kingdoms to his cause. They assembled a fleet of 1,000 ships. Yes, this is where that phrase comes from. The face that launched 1,000 ships, and sailed for Troy to reclaim Helen and restore Greek honor. Troy was not an easy target. The city stood on a hill near the coast of what is now Turkey, protected by massive walls that rose high above the plain. These weren't ordinary fortifications. According to legend, they had been built by the gods themselves, and they seemed impregnable. The Greek forces landed on the beaches and laid siege to the city. But taking Troy by direct assault proved impossible. The walls held. The gates remained closed. And so the Greeks settled in for what they thought might be a long wait. They didn't know how long. Years passed. 1 year became 2, then 5, then 7. Warriors who had arrived as young men grew older. Some died in battle. Others died of disease. But the city held, and the war dragged on. Both sides had their heroes. For the Greeks, there was Achilles, the greatest warrior who ever lived, nearly invincible except for his famous heel. There was Ajax, strong as an ox and just as stubborn. There was Odysseus, clever and cunning, always thinking, always planning. For Troy, there was Hector, prince of Troy and its greatest defender, noble and brave. There was Paris himself, better with a bow than a sword, passionate but perhaps not as courageous as his older brother. And there was King Priam, aged and weary, watching his city endure year after year of siege. By the 10th year of the war, something had to give. Both sides were exhausted. The Greeks had won battles but couldn't take the city. The Trojans had held their walls but couldn't drive the Greeks back to their ships. Then fate dealt Troy a devastating blow. Achilles, the Greeks' greatest warrior, killed Hector in single combat. The prince's death sent shockwaves through both camps. Troy had lost its champion, its greatest defender. The Trojans mourned, and the Greeks sensed opportunity. But even with Hector dead, the walls still stood. The gates remained barred. And the Greeks had lost their own champion when Paris, in a rare moment of martial success, shot Achilles in his one vulnerable spot, that famous heel. The stalemate seemed unbreakable. Strength of arms had failed. The gods had played their games and taken their sides, but neither divine intervention nor human courage had proven sufficient to end this conflict. What was needed wasn't more strength. What was needed was something the Greeks had in abundance, embodied in one man in particular. What was needed was cleverness. What was needed was deception. What was needed was Odysseus. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, had never wanted this war. When the Greek kings had first called for warriors to sail to Troy, he had pretended to be mad, plowing his fields in circles and sowing them with salt. But they'd seen through his ruse, and he'd been forced to join the expedition. Now, 10 years later, he was tired. They were all tired. But Odysseus's mind never stopped working, never stopped searching for angles and advantages. While other men saw only walls and gates, Odysseus saw patterns of human behavior. He saw pride. He saw curiosity. He saw the weakness that exists in every strength. The idea, when it came to him, was audacious, reckless, even. It required the Greeks to do something that went against every warrior instinct, to appear to give up, to seem to admit defeat. He gathered the Greek commanders in council. Agamemnon was skeptical. Many of the warriors were outraged. Retreat? After 10 years? After all they had lost? But Odysseus persisted, laying out his plan step by careful step. They would build something. A gift. An offering to the gods for safe passage home. It would be magnificent, massive, something the Trojans couldn't ignore. Something that would appeal to their pride, to their sense of victory, to their desire to see the Greeks finally gone. They would build a horse. A great wooden horse, large enough to hold men inside its belly. The Greeks set to work with desperate energy. They needed the right wood, strong but workable. They needed a master craftsman, and they found him in Epius, a builder of some renown among the Greek forces. 4 days, the sound of sawing and hammering echoed across the plain. The horse took shape, rising higher and higher. It was enormous. Some accounts say 30 feet tall, others say even larger. Its body was hollow, with a hidden compartment inside large enough for armed men to hide. They made it beautiful. This was crucial to the plan. It had to look like a genuine offering, not a weapon. They carved details into the wood, giving it an almost lifelike quality. They made it magnificent enough that the Trojans would want it, would covet it, would feel compelled to bring it inside their walls. The rest of the Greek army prepared for the next phase. They struck their tents. They gathered their supplies. They made ready to sail, but they wouldn't go far, just far enough to be out of sight, to a nearby island called Tenedos, where they could wait. The most dangerous part of the plan fell to a chosen few. These would be the men hidden inside the horse, the warriors who would be carried into the enemy's stronghold with nothing but wooden walls between them and death. Odysseus himself would go, of course. This was his plan, and he would see it through or die trying. Menelaus, Helen's wronged husband, insisted on being included. He had more reason than anyone to see this through. Dions, one of the greatest Greek warriors, volunteered. So did Neoptolemus, young son of the fallen Achilles, eager to prove himself worthy of his father's name. Different accounts give different numbers and names. Some say there were 23 warriors in the horse. Others say 30 or even 40. But all agree on this. They were the best the Greeks had. Brave, disciplined, and willing to trust their lives to a desperate gambit. They gathered their weapons, swords, spears, shields. They said quiet farewells to their comrades, not knowing if they would see them again. And then, one by one, they climbed into the belly of the wooden horse. Inside, it was dark and cramped. They would have to remain absolutely silent, barely breathing, as they were wheeled toward Troy. One cough, one sound of armor scraping against wood, and the plan would fail. They would be trapped, burned alive or cut down as they tried to escape. The entrance to the horse's belly was sealed behind them. And they waited. Dawn broke on a scene the Trojans had not witnessed in 10 years. The Greek camp was empty. The tents were gone. The cooking fires were cold. The beach, which had been crowded with ships for a decade, was empty except for one thing. The horse. It stood alone on the plain between the Greek camp and Troy's walls, massive and mysterious, gleaming in the morning light. From Troy's walls, the guards stared in disbelief. Could it be? Had the Greeks really left? Cautiously, a small group ventured out. They found the camp abandoned, everything of value taken. The Greeks were truly gone, except for the horse, and one Greek soldier. His name was Sinon, and finding him was no accident. He was part of the plan, perhaps the most crucial part. When the Trojans discovered him hiding near the Greek camp, he played his role perfectly. He claimed he had been left behind, abandoned by his own people, marked for sacrifice to the gods to ensure a safe voyage home. He wept. He begged for mercy. And when the Trojans asked about the horse, he gave them exactly the story Odysseus had crafted. The horse, Sinon said, was an offering to Athena, built to appease the goddess for an insult the Greeks had committed against her temple. They had made it so large, he claimed, specifically so the Trojans couldn't bring it inside their city. If it remained outside, the Greeks would retain Athena's favor. But if Troy took it inside the walls, well, then the goddess's blessing would transfer to them instead. It was masterful manipulation. The lie contained just enough detail to be believable. It gave the Trojans a reason to want the horse, and it made them feel clever for seeing through the Greek plot to keep it outside. Inside Troy, a heated argument erupted. The horse had been wheeled to the city gates, and now the Trojans debated what to do with it. Some were suspicious. Laocoon, a Trojan priest, was the most vocal. "I fear the Greeks, even bearing gifts," he famously proclaimed. He argued passionately that the horse should be burned or pushed off a cliff. To prove his point, he hurled a spear at the horse's flank. It thudded into the wood, and inside, the hidden Greeks held their breath, frozen in terror that they had been discovered. But the spear stuck harmlessly, and no sound came from within. Then tragedy struck Laocoon in a way that seemed to confirm the horse was divine. 2 enormous serpents emerged from the sea and attacked Laocoon and his 2 sons, crushing them in their coils. The Trojans, witnessing this, believed it was divine punishment for attacking a sacred offering. The debate was over. The horse would enter Troy. Cassandra, King Priam's daughter who had been cursed by Apollo to speak true prophecies that no one would believe, screamed warnings. She raved about fire and death and destruction. The Trojans ignored her, as they always did, dismissing her as mad. The decision was made. The gates, those gates that had remained closed for 10 years, were thrown open wide. The Trojans worked for hours, some even tearing down part of the wall to accommodate the horse's massive size. With ropes and rollers, singing songs of victory, they pulled their doom inside their city. That night, Troy celebrated. After 10 years of war, the Greeks were gone. They had survived. They had won. Wine flowed freely through the streets. Music played. People danced and laughed and felt joy for the first time in a decade. The great wooden horse stood in the city center, decorated with flowers, a monument to their victory and the favor of the gods. As the night wore on and the celebrations continued, no one noticed when the festivities finally began to wind down. No one saw when exhaustion and wine took their toll, and the Trojans stumbled to their beds. The city that had remained vigilant for 10 years, that had posted guards and watched for threats every single night of the siege, finally let down its guard. The city slept. Inside the horse, the Greek warriors waited in agonizing silence. They had been cramped in darkness for hours, listening to the celebration outside, not daring to move. Now, finally, they heard the signal they'd been waiting for. A soft sound from outside the horse. Sinon, who had talked his way into the city and waited for this moment, had given the all-clear. Odysseus carefully, quietly, opened the hidden door in the horse's belly. One by one, the warriors descended, their weapons ready. Their legs were stiff, their bodies aching, but adrenaline pushed them forward. They moved through the sleeping city like ghosts. Their first task was the gates. The same gates that had been closed for 10 years, that had protected Troy from the full might of the Greek army, were now opened from the inside. Torches were lit on the walls, the signal to the Greek fleet waiting at Tenedos. The ships had already been sailing back under cover of darkness. Now, seeing the signal fires, they beached on the shore. Thousands of Greek warriors poured into Troy through the open gates. What happened next was chaos and carnage. The Trojans woke to find enemies in their streets, their city breached, their defenses meaningless. Warriors grabbed weapons and fought desperately, but they were scattered, disorganized, outnumbered. The Greeks showed no mercy. This was not just battle. This was vengeance for 10 years of war. Buildings burned. Blood ran in the streets. The great palace of Priam became a slaughterhouse. King Priam himself was killed, murdered at the altar where he had sought sanctuary, by Neoptolemus, son of Achilles. Hector's young son was thrown from the walls, killed so he could never grow up to avenge his father and reclaim Troy. The women of Troy, including Queen Hecuba and the Princess Andromache, Hector's widow, were taken as slaves. Menelaus finally found Helen. The sources differ on what happened next. Some say he intended to kill her for the betrayal that had cost so many lives. But when he saw her again after 10 years, his anger melted. Whether through her beauty, Aphrodite's lingering influence, or genuine love, he forgave her. She would return with him to Sparta. By dawn, Troy was finished. The city that had stood for generations, that had withstood 10 years of siege by the greatest army ever assembled, had fallen in a single night. Its walls, still strong, enclosed only ruins and corpses. Its gates, finally opened, had admitted destruction. The Greeks loaded their ships with treasure and captives and set sail for home, victorious at last. The story of the Trojan horse has echoed through the centuries. It became a byword for deception, for the danger of accepting gifts from enemies, for the vulnerability that exists even in the strongest defenses. Beware of Greeks bearing gifts, we say, though Virgil's original Latin was "I fear the Greeks even when bringing gifts." The phrase has survived for over 2,000 years because the lesson it teaches is timeless. The greatest walls can be breached. The strongest city can fall. Not always through superior force, but through cleverness, through deception, through exploiting pride and desire and the human tendency to see what we want to see. Was it real? Probably not as the myths tell it. Archaeologists have found evidence of a real Troy, and evidence that it was indeed destroyed by fire around the time the stories suggest. But a giant wooden horse? Most historians doubt it. The story may be a metaphor for some other stratagem, perhaps a siege engine, perhaps a different form of trickery entirely. But the power of the story lies not in its historical accuracy but in its truth about human nature. About how we can be undone not by our weaknesses but by our strengths. Troy's pride in their walls, their confidence in their security, their desire to claim victory. The Trojan horse endures because it reminds us that sometimes the greatest threats come not crashing through the gates, but invited in through the front door, welcomed as gifts. And that lesson, whether the story is myth or memory, is as relevant today as it was 3,000 years ago.